Yesterday morning, Arturo was ordained a transitional deacon. This morning he served at Mass and preached his first sermon, and it wasn't half bad. And it wasn't too long either. But the ordination to the transitional diaconate is really a big step for a man as he's preparing for the priesthood, because that's the moment in which he makes the promises to the bishop to pray the Liturgy of the Hours for and with the church. That's 5 times a day of praying the Psalms. It's when he promises celibacy, and it's when he promises for the first time respect and obedience to the archbishop and his successors. And so all of those things happened yesterday, and now Deacon Arturo has got 1 more year to go in seminary before he's ordained a priest, and then able to go and serve in whichever parish they put him in. So he's got a final year in seminary, though. You go back for that final year as a deacon, and you kind of already got everything. They've already taught you all that there is to teach you. So they have these other classes. They have various practica. So you've got Mass practicum, where you just dress up and do fake Mass. We had a little fake chapel that we used where we would do fake Mass. And then you have confession practicum. That one's a lot of fun because you go to each other and you try to make stuff up, right? You try to see if you can really scandalize the other guy. I was always told that was not the purpose of the class and that I needed to tone things down, but I just enjoyed it too much. And then you have other classes that they just kind of make up to fill space. We had this one class that was called priesthood class, and I was like, that's a stupid name for a class at the seminary. Shouldn't they all really be priesthood class? But this one was specifically doing some certain things and whatnot, and kind of preparing for parish ministry and preparing for a few other things. And it was taught by this Franciscan priest from New York. He had the accent. He was tall. He was scary. He was a retired 2-star rear admiral, and before he retired, he was the chief of chaplains for the whole U.S. military. And so he commanded a presence when he was there, and he gave us this assignment one day in class, and it was to come up with a mission statement for a hypothetical parish. And so what did I do? I went to the Gospel of Matthew, and I wrote, "Go forth, teaching all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." That was my mission statement that I didn't come up with. I stole it. I took it out of the Gospel. And Father Lou came over with his scary New York accent. He's like, "Come on, Nadolski, you got to be more original." And it's like, how could I be any more original than the Gospel? And I've recently been thinking, somebody told me we need to come up with a more precise mission statement to have, and a vision statement as well for the parish. That's the thing that people like to do. And so I've been kind of thinking of what could our mission statement be? And I always go back to that: go forth, teaching all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Or the mission is getting everybody to heaven, right? Which you go and you teach them and you baptize them, and that's the start for how people get to heaven. But it's this idea of, how do we proclaim the truth of the gospel? How do we proclaim the message of Jesus Christ, that he came to earth, that he suffered, died, was buried, that he rose from the dead and ascended to heaven? How do we convey that message to the community, to the world? It's an important question. Well, teach everybody. Teach all nations. The word nations isn't the best. The college at the seminary over the door, it had it in Latin. It said, "Eunte docite omnes gentes." Go teach all gentes, people. Go teach all people. And so we're called to go out and to teach people. Now, Jesus did that, right, with his apostles. He gathered them around himself and he taught them. He spent time with them. Really, that's the best way to be able to teach, is to have groups of people that come together and we talk and we share. And so Jesus taught his disciples everything that there was for him to teach them. And then after his resurrection, he ascended to heaven. And we saw it in the Acts of the Apostles. The disciples are looking up at heaven. They're like, wait a minute. Where's he going? Like, we need him to be here with us. So Jesus decided that he was going to take on our flesh, right? He condescended to be with us on earth in our frail human state. He came to be like us, to be with us, but it wasn't enough just to come and be with us so that we could, like, hey, there's Jesus. Then he had to return to his Father. And so the Ascension, Jesus ascends back to heaven. He came to meet us where we are, right? He taught us. He led us. But then he goes to the Father. And so where do we go? We follow. We're called to follow him to the Father. Jesus didn't just come and, live among us and say everybody's good enough, right? Jesus didn't call us to be good enough. Jesus didn't call us to just be okay. In fact, Jesus calls us to something that's almost impossible. If it is impossible for us. He says, be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. Be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. None of us are there. We try, right? I hope we strive. We do our best to follow God, to be faithful. But we're not there, right? We're not perfect. In fact, there's never going to be a moment in our lives when we look and we say, okay, I'm perfect now. Usually people who think that they're perfect have severe problems. Usually they're narcissists. But we'll never be perfect here on earth in the way that the world calls us to perfection. And so Jesus comes to be with us, but he loves us to the point where he can't just stay with us. He wants to elevate us to something more. And so in teaching all people, following that command of Jesus, we're called to call people to a higher place, right? So we come to Mass on Sunday, and we come and we sit down, right? And wouldn't it be nice if Father just said, you know what, y'all are all great people. Everything's good. You're good enough, right? But no, we're not good enough. We're called to holiness. We're called to conversion. Sometimes when people get their feathers a little ruffled because the priest might have said something kind of harsh, pointed, never happens at this parish. People get their feathers a little ruffled because perhaps we're being made aware that, we're not good enough as we are. We're called to something better. A lot of people play sports, I know. Your coach on the field, if he's just out there and you're practicing, you're running, coach is just like, you're good enough. Just kind of stay there in your mediocrity. No, the coach is constantly challenging you. You got to do better, right? You got to hit the ball further. You got to, I don't know what you do with soccer. You kick. You got to kick it more. Right? But there's always this kind of we've got to be better. School, right? Well, some people are like, I got to push myself more and more. I was always content with C's in school. I didn't care. My parents cared. They were like, why are we paying all this money for you to get C's? But see, I was kind of like, well, it's good enough. It wasn't good enough, right? It wasn't. And so God looks at us and he sees that we are good, right? Because he made us in his image and likeness. And he loves us and he died for us. But he says, I want more for you, right? You're good, but you can be perfect. You're good, but you can be perfect. You just have to trust me. You have to follow me. And so the church teaches us, right? The church that Jesus Christ established, she teaches us, and she calls us to holiness. And sometimes that's inconvenient because it means that we're being called kind of away from the ways of the world. We like to focus on, what I've got here. But what I've got here isn't important, right? Because Jesus isn't calling me to live here forever. He's calling me to heaven. That means that I've got to let go of some of what I've got here. That might be difficult. I like my truck. I like my 75-inch TV. No need to have a 75-inch TV, but I like it. I like to focus on things that I can kind of have and touch. Been recently watching YouTube videos on getting a laptop. I don't need a laptop. I have one, and I hardly ever use it, and it's old, but it sits in my desk drawer, and I use it 4 times a year when we have our finance council meeting. It's the one that I played solitaire on in seminary, and it still works fine. But Father Michael got a new laptop before he went to Israel. He uses his laptop all the time, and so now I'm like, well, I guess I should maybe get a new laptop too, right? And so I'm watching all these YouTube videos, and like, that's the one I want, the $3,000 one. Oh, they have a $2,200 model, but I need the i9 processor and the extra graphic power. I don't know why, just to say I have it. So there I am sitting looking at this $3,000 computer that I don't need, and I'm like, why would I spend my money on that? I don't know. The things of the world, they just kind of like get so into us. They grab us and they take hold of us and they control us, and we don't even know why sometimes. If I bought that computer, I'd sit there for a few days programming it and doing everything I wanted to it, and then it would probably end up in my desk drawer, and I'd have this $3,000 paperweight. And I'd probably be like, well, that was stupid. I mean, I guess I can write it off of my taxes. That's a good thing, but, right? The tax man. But I'm not going to do it, right? Because I'm like, no, I don't need that. That's not going to help me to be holy. That's not going to help me to be more productive in any way. It's just not necessary. But we look at the things of the world and we get so enamored and we're like, yeah, but this stuff's so nice and shiny, right? Jesus was here with us. Wait a minute, why is Jesus leaving? Why is he going back to heaven? Doesn't he know how great it is here? Doesn't he know how wonderful we all are? How good we all are? How cool the stuff we have is? Doesn't he want to watch TV? Doesn't he want to do whatever it is, whatever worldly thing that I like? No, he wants to be at the right hand of the Father, and he calls us to be with him as his body. Opening prayer said, where the head goes, the body must follow. And so Christ the head is in heaven. We as members of his body are called to follow after him. We as members of his body are called to be transformed, to be changed. Yeah, we live in the world. We do world stuff, right? But God calls us to something much higher than that. He calls us to live for him. He calls us to lay down our lives. He calls us to imitate him. He calls us to leave behind those things that impede us from doing his will. Maybe you don't want a $3,000 laptop. Maybe you want something else. I don't know. Maybe you want a $90,000 car. You want whatever it is you want. You want a pool in your backyard so that you don't have to go to the... Bentwater has like 8 or 9 community pools in the neighborhood there, I think. And it's amazing when I go through there playing golf how many houses they got to build their own private pool. It's like, yeah, you got to have your own pool. There's 7 pools, but you got to have your own pool. Whatever it is in our life that we're like, I gotta have this. This makes me feel fulfilled, right? This is going to make me happy. If only I can, get that next promotion and get paid just a little bit more. Be able to buy that fun car, right? Maybe be able to buy that, vacation home. Just focusing all on that. Focusing on what I can do here. What's going to give me power. What's going to make me happy here. Rather than thinking of the future. Rather than storing up treasures that will last into eternity. And so the feast of the Ascension is an important feast for us because it reminds us that we're not called to live here. We're not called to be of the world. We're not called to grow in worldly power. But rather, we're called to grow in holiness. We're called to prepare ourselves to live with Christ in heaven. And so, Next week will be the Feast of Pentecost. It'll be 50 days since the resurrection. It's supposed to be 9 days since Ascension Thursday, but it's Sunday, so we call it Ascension Thursday Sunday, I think is the proper name for it. But we prepare for the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, whereby the Holy Spirit is poured out upon the church. The Holy Spirit is poured out upon the apostles, so that indeed they may go into the world, they may teach all people, they may baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Let us be reminded of our role as Christians by virtue of our baptism, whereby we receive the Holy Spirit, in confirmation, where the fullness of the gifts and fruits of the Holy Spirit were given to us. Let us be reminded that each and every one of us share in that task to teach all nations, to teach all peoples. We can do that by our example of life. We can do that by the way that we live. We can do that even while we're doing all the other stuff, right? Even while you're playing sports or while you're doing whatever. You're at the car show with your cool car. You can still teach all nations. It doesn't mean that we have to be boring and we have to put our heads underground. But it means that we look for opportunities to proclaim the gospel. We look for opportunities to sanctify others. We look for opportunities to be the presence of God. And so as we continue and approach the conclusion of this Easter season, let us ask that as Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father, He indeed may send His Holy Spirit upon us so that we may recognize our duty to go out into the world to proclaim the gospel, to teach all peoples.